today we're going to talk about the kind of the physical world of ministry, the world we actually live in and have to navigate in order to do ministry today, particularly in a Canadian context. So I hope you enjoy. My PhD work is actually in a field called textual criticism, and I've worked closely with New Testament manuscripts. So if you guys ever want to do a How We Got the Bible series with somebody who's actually worked with the manuscript, I'd love to walk you through that world of, you know, in your Bibles there'll be this little footnote at the bottom that says some manuscripts don't have or do have. I'd love to help you navigate that world, but that's another topic for another time. Let me tell you a little bit about how I ended up in this nonprofit world, as I've called it. Our churches are nonprofits, and in Canada, they have to navigate certain realities, like the CRA. There's just ways of doing things, whether you can receive, you can't give your people receipts for their gifts unless you're a registered charity. Well, when I became the president of Alberta Bible College, I've been in the nonprofit world. The accreditation world is another one of my worlds where I deal with the accrediting associations that says, yes, you're a really good college. So I'm actually a commissioner with the Association of Biblical Higher Education. So I've got these multiple worlds where I deal with a lot of technicalities. But anyway, when I came into the role of president, I realized that I was going to have to get to know more about this nonprofit side of the world that we live in. I'll explain a little more what I mean by that. We had the chance of gaining a gift from a foundation. In fact, Western Christian College that I served in Regina from 2003 to 2009 came to an end. It closed. And I was involved as the academic dean there and had gotten to know a little bit more about the nonprofit world. But anyway, Western Christian College was getting rid of all of its assets. It's closed, and when you're a charity, you have to give it away to other charities. You can't give it to individuals. When a church closed, you can't give that money to a person. It has to go to another nonprofit or into another mission. Well, anyway, Western was getting rid of their assets. We had a chance to get some of it at Alberta Bible College, and so we were looking at what is it that we could do with that money if we had it. And so we looked at the various needs, and what I discovered is that at the time that I started with Alberta Bible College, 2015, when I started with them, most of our students were not going or looking to prepare for church ministry. They were looking to enter some kind of nonprofit ministry, and I began to probe a little more about why that was so. And I don't know what your experience is, but our young people are not going to church the way young people once went to church. Again, I don't know what your world is like, but it's certainly true of my world. And so, since we were a nonprofit, I suggested that we build a nonprofit program, because if we were teaching it, then we need to be very good at it, or it would look hypocritical for us to teach it and not be good at it. So everything that we teach in the nonprofit track is applicable. It applies to the work that I do at Alberta Bible College. And so there's various government agencies that we report to on a regular basis. So that's kind of my step into the world of nonprofit. And so I started building a couple of the modules that I felt more passionate about. I don't do the financial course. I can read a spreadsheet. By the way, if you're in church ministry, you need to be able to read your budgets and your spreadsheets. You just have to. You have to be able to read those things. Otherwise, you won't know how the money's going. And if the money's not there, no matter how great the ideas are, some of those ideas are not going to get into play without the money. And so, anyway, so I started building that one, and I started building something I've been working on before called the Effective Organization. And some of that material will come out here today. So that's kind of my world of working with it. I work with nonprofit realities day in and day out. what do we mean by nonprofit? Well, it's basically a kind of company. A for-profit company is attempting to make money, and if it's a corporate company, it's trying to make money for the stockholders. Nonprofits are not trying to make money, but yet they need to make money. Let me explain that. A nonprofit is set up for usually to do some good in society. So we can have a nonprofit dedicated to voting, we can have a nonprofit dedicated to the environment. There's all kinds of nonprofits that can come up. But a nonprofit is basically taking, if you make money, that is, if you bring in more money than you spend, then that money goes back into the nonprofit. Nobody benefits personally from it. And that allows nonprofits to be kind of perpetual organizations. So when we talk about nonprofits, particularly in Canada, they need to be registered charities. Now, you don't really have to be a registered charity, but you find out that you're going to be caught because some donors want a receipt for their gifts, and without that registration, Canada will not recognize the gift. So they've got us. We've got to do it. Churches find themselves in this. Churches, by the way, are nonprofits in Canada. So I'm not talking theologically, I'm not talking Bible, I'm talking government. Churches are nonprofits, and as nonprofits, they have to have certain things. They have to have a board of trustees, which can be the same group as your elders, but does not have to be. I don't know how you guys worked all of this out. You guys can tell me more about it. But you do need usually 5 officers. 5's kind of the lowest number I've ever seen. 5 officers who are accountable to the government for the financial well-being and the well-being in general of the organization. So let me give you an illustration. If you were to have 5 elders as spiritual shepherds and 5 members who are the board of directors, if you went that route, and there are churches who've gone that route, in the case of a legal battle, these directors are more important than your spiritual elders from a government's point of view. If there is a lawsuit, these folks are on the hook for responsibility, and so when you blend those two things together, as churches in Canada tend to do, it becomes very confusing because it's really hard to remember which hat you have on. But a spiritual shepherd has nothing to do with the board of trustees. However, sometimes we have people wearing the same hats. The problem with the model that has spiritual elders on one side and a board of directors on the other is that you end up with a church. I know Jesus is the head of the church, so give me a little bit of license here. You end up with 2 heads, and if they're not moving in the same direction, you're going to have some tension. So nonprofits are not in the business of making a profit. They are in the business of making a difference in the world. They will often have a board of trustees. If the nonprofit becomes large enough, they will often appoint somebody that is the language is chief executive officer, CEO, or in our case, the minister will often become essentially the employee of the nonprofit corporation. So normally you'll have a board of trustees, you'll have a director, and then you'll have employees and volunteers. And one of the things that's really big about these not-for-profits is that lots of space for volunteers to give hours to do things that are meaningful and wholesome. And so you can see very easily how this kind of fits the church world, except it's kind of strange thinking of the pastor as the CEO. But in the corporate model, that's probably where the government's going to see the pastor. So let me describe my situation at Alberta Bible College. I have a board consisting of 12 members. Those 12 members create the boundaries in which I work. I am their only employee. Everybody else works for me. So if we're not having the results that we hope for, the board will fire me. They don't get to fire my staff. If I need somebody to be fired on my staff, I have to do it. We are a not-for-profit educational institution. And so we're also accountable for filling out certain forms and documents every year for the government of Canada. We are also, let me just kind of throw this really interesting wrinkle into the thing. We are also what's called a 501c3, which is a U.S. designation, 501c3. We're also a nonprofit registered in the United States so that we can receive gifts from the United States and also and grant receipts that will be recognized by the U.S. government. So we actually kind of maintain two sets of documentation for both of those governments. Everybody kind of got the world of nonprofit. And by the way, in church life, if you're doing this well, you don't see it except at the AGM. The AGM is probably the only place you're going to see it, because a church functioning right, not talking this vaccine language, but if you're in ministry, if you're one of the elders, you need to know as much of this stuff as you can possibly know, because you will need it. Is that helpful? So you got a sense of for-profit versus not-for-profit. So in some sense, we're talking about two different kinds of businesses, but they're still both businesses. Now, let me put my preacher hat on for just a second. The church is not a business. Don't run it quite like a business. Okay, now let me put my other hat on. The church is a business. Make sure you do that side really well. And the reason we're going to do it really well is because we are Christian. It's part of the mandate of being a Christian. Yeah. You guys realize that speed limits are not recommendations. That as Christians, we do the speed limit. If you don't get that, you need to go back and kind of look at the lordship of Jesus and what it meant to say, I follow Jesus. And one of the commitments we've made is that we're going to do our best to work along with the government and only find ourselves against the government when they push it. But we're going to do our best. We're going to honor the king. And we're going to pray for those in power. We're going to do our best. Anyway, I just moved from teaching to preaching, so I should back off. Any questions so far about this? Because this is kind of the big distinction, is that if you're involved in a nonprofit, there's certain rules that go with it, certain things you need to know. By the way, there is a organization called, we call them the 4 C's for short. They're the Christian Center for, no, they're Canadian Council, no, they just rebranded. Canadian Center for Christian Charities. I think I've got it. Look up those numbers on those letters on Google and you'll find it. They are a resource. They are a nonprofit that resources nonprofits. But their website is full of information about all of the things, like how to do a board meeting, what kind of notes do you need to keep on hand, all of those kind of things.
So when you say nonprofit, is there a limit of the church income that would categorize you to be a nonprofit?
No, there's no limits at all. I mean, a church bringing in $25 a week could be a nonprofit. It's really more of a government designation. Yeah. But it does cost a certain amount of money to get to that point. So when you're planting new churches, you need to think of, I've always thought we were too eager to get a new church, its number, too quickly. I would rather treat a new church as a branch campus of an old church until it seemed to make sense to get the number, because it's at least $1,500 to work the paperwork, and you're going to have to get lawyers involved to do it right. But one could, and we've thought about doing this as a college, is we could be a number that allows other ministries to get started, and then once they grew up enough, and if they died, well, you didn't waste the money on the nonprofit. But the challenge there is that if you're a church, you can't be in a different business than church. if you're a college like we are, we can have, and churches can have auxiliary businesses for extra income because we all need extra streams of income. But what you can do is if you're renting houses more than you're doing church, that could raise some eyebrows from the CRA.
There's a kind of thing that people think about multimillionaire pastors in America who raise so much money, and I don't know how would you categorize it to be a nonprofit where the money belongs to the pastor.
Well, the problem with corrupt systems is that you can pay people as a nonprofit, and so the board should be regulating the pay of the CEO. But what stateside pastors sometimes do is they disconnect themselves from their boards. You watch every pastor that goes that billionaire route, they will separate themselves from their mother denomination. That's because accountability comes with the board.
Okay.
Yeah.
Talking about the separation of the board of directors and the elders, I know if this is a maybe in a big church setting, but in a small church setting, like what we do here is we amalgamate that kind of responsibility. Means amalgamate means like you're an elder and then you can be elected also as a board of officers. Yeah. So one reason that we have found or we have looked at it is just like decision-making process, which also limits the advancement of the program of the church against the board of directors, something like that. So we just take that route to join them together. Just for decision-making.
You might be interested in a document that I created while serving as one of the elders at the Bow Valley Church, in which we didn't have a separate board of directors. The elders served in that role. And so we created a document that outlined, in this capacity, this is what you do. Because sometimes elders will use their corporate capacitors as their grounds for authority. You are a shepherd in God's church because of God's gifting and calling upon you, not the governmental status. And so helping people keep those, and so we created a document that separated those two out so that we're very clear which hat we have on at the time.
Yeah, because our church here is kind of a transition thing that we have a lot of, honestly speaking, split so many years, but we never come to a point of saying that kind of a decision that the board of directors and elders had a argument together, but just because the elders and the board of directors is one. So
I think as you bring on new people, you have to have very clear descriptions for them. Don't make them find out by surprise. It's never fun to find out by surprise. So be very clear that when you call a new elder that they will also probably serve as a trustee, right? So, all right, we're into the thick of it. We've only gone one slide. So, how many nonprofits are there? These are numbers that I picked up. In fact, I just picked up this morning. Yeah, in Canada, there's over 170,000 nonprofits. That's on the listing of all the nonprofits in Canada. In Alberta, I bring that only because I'm bringing Alberta to you today. I know you're British Columbia, so we'll do both. In Alberta, there are 26,200 nonprofits. In BC, there are over 29,000. From the website, from the governmental website, oh, oops. I pressed more than once and it's fighting me. Let me back up one more. Yeah. In in British Columbia, there are over 29,000. This sector employs over 86,000 people, and throughout it contributes 6.7 billion to BC's economy. Nonprofits are actually a big thing. They almost, in some of the provinces, make up a third of the business world. And what makes nonprofits so incredibly important is because they get to do things that we hope government might get around to, but they do it instead. There's lots of healthcare kind of things, care for the elderly, the sexually exploited. The nonprofit world is basically covering the ground on this. And so it is a fairly big deal, the role that nonprofits play in Canadian society. I'd like to find out how many of these are churches. I couldn't find the numbers that would break it out and say how many of these are churches, but one of the challenges that I think we have in this particular culture, and I'm talking about mainline general British culture in Canada, is that the church is not well received by culture. And so we live in a time in which churches need to do things, they always should have been doing things, they need to do things that actually make a difference in the lives of people. Now obviously we're trying to get people ready for heaven, but we also need to make a difference now. And that's why I've encouraged churches as nonprofits to try to discern in your own church group, what is the difference that we can make now? I like the fact that we're meeting today in a public library. I like that. Because when we meet in our church buildings, we tend to be bubbled off.
Yeah.
And so playing significant roles in the society we live in, and nonprofit, by the way, churches can take up particular roles. Right now, Pat and I are involved, more Pat than me. We're involved in a food bank ministry that's feeding a lot of Ukrainian refugees right now. And so every Thursday, Pat goes down to the food bank. She gathers up food. It's done like a TV show almost, because you get to run through the warehouse and grab everything for about 5 minutes. You get to go out, put it in your truck, come back, get another load. How many times do you do it?
About 7.
7, yeah. Yeah. It's in place of her workout every week. So she ends up, and the cost, the outlay cost is about $100 a month, right? But they're taking like thousands of dollars of food that will eventually spoil if it's not used, and taking it to a Ukrainian church where it is then being distributed to Ukrainian refugees. And that just happens to be, it was right there in front of us, let's do it. But it's an attempt to make a difference in the world we actually live in. By the way, this is the first time since I've been at Engr Bible College that we're actually keeping a food pantry for our students. I've got 12 to 14 of my 85-ish, 70 to 85 students that are international students, and so they're living here for the first time, and so they're trying to settle in and set up house, figure out how to survive here. And so, anyway, churches need to make a visible difference where they are. People should be glad that you're there, and if you were to disappear, they should miss you. Okay, I'm doing church work now. Let's get back to the nonprofit.
Or they are happy you're gone, that you are gone.
What I'm trying to do today